The year is 2026. Global enterprises have just poured $2.5 trillion into artificial intelligence. But here's the jaw-dropping reality. 61% of those companies are seeing zero return on that investment. They are trapped in pilot purgatory, holding the keys to a technological Ferrari but with no idea how to build the road. Welcome to the Kategos Deep Dive. I'm your host. At Kategos, we don't just sell software, we architect autonomy. We bridge the 100-year execution gap between raw AI capability and real-world reliability. Whether it's through our Model Context Protocol or our Agentic Zero Trust Architecture, we help the world's most ambitious organizations transition from passive systems of record to proactive systems of action. Today we are dissecting our recent white paper, The Wealth of Agents. We're going to show you why 1926 is repeating itself in 2026, and how you can join the elite 6% of high performers who are seeing 10x returns. This isn't just a tech talk. This is a blueprint for the second industrial revolution. Let's head into the engine room.
In the last 12 months alone, corporate America and global enterprises collectively spent $2 trillion on artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Trillion! With a T. I mean, they bought the absolute best foundational models on the market, right? They gave those tools to their top performers, rolled out these massive integration campaigns, and basically just crossed their fingers.
Which is a terrifying strategy, by the way.
It really is. And do you know what the result was? According to the data we're looking at today, Tuesday, March 31st, 2026, 61% of those companies got absolutely zero measurable return on investment.
Nothing.
Literally nothing. No bottom line impact, no miraculous efficiency gains, just billions of dollars vanishing into the soil.
It's honestly the defining economic paradox of our current decade. I mean, we are witnessing the largest, fastest allocation of capital in the history of human commerce, and the vast majority of it is currently trapped in a void.
Right. And if you're listening to this, you are probably feeling that friction firsthand. You know, you want to know what's actually real, what's just brochureware, and most importantly, where all that money is actually going if it isn't hitting the bottom line.
Exactly.
So welcome to the Deep Dive. We are coming to you straight from home base here at Kategos today, and our mission is to unpack the core thesis of the foundational Kategos white paper, which is titled The Wealth of Agents, solving the 100-year execution gap in the second industrial revolution alongside the operational realities laid out in the Kategos brand fact sheet.
And we really need to start by understanding the landscape you just described, because, well, the industry has fundamentally shifted over the past year. We were officially out of what analysts used to call the trough of disillusionment.
Right, that hype cycle of 2023 and 2024 is totally dead and buried.
Oh, completely dead. Incumbent software vendors are no longer selling theoretical vaporware. They are selling highly robust, enterprise-grade, autonomous capabilities.
And the access is just unprecedented. I mean, I'm looking at a statistic here that says 60% of the global enterprise workforce now has sanctioned enterprise-grade AI tools at their disposal.
Yeah, which is a 50% expansion in access in just one single year.
Which is wild. Half the corporate world was essentially handed the keys to a technological Ferrari.
Right, which brings us face to face with what the white paper terms the great agentic mystery.
The great agentic mystery.
Yeah, you have the capital, the $2.52 trillion. You have the access, 60% of the workforce. The technology is undeniably capable, yet 6 out of 10 companies are utterly paralyzed.
They're stuck.
They're completely stuck in what we call pilot purgatory.
Pilot purgatory, man, it is the perfect phrase for it.
It really is, isn't it?
Because they're running these endless, heavily siloed experiments. You know, a little chatbot for HR here, a localized summarization tool for the legal team over there. But none of it translates into actual structural business value.
No, it just becomes an expensive party trick. And to understand why this massive execution gap exists,
right,
and why so many brilliant executives are failing to get ROI right now in 2026, we have to recognize that this is an architectural failure, not a technological one.
Okay, an architectural failure.
Right. And to truly diagnose that failure, the white paper argues that we have to look backward exactly 1 century. We are currently living through a historical echo.
I found this part of the analysis absolutely fascinating because it really forces you to zoom out. The document draws this direct, unavoidable parallel between where we are sitting right now in 2026 and exactly 100 years ago in 1926.
It's eerie how similar it is.
Walk us through that. What did the global industrial landscape look like a century ago?
Well, in 1926, the world was standing at a massive structural precipice, essentially grappling with the rapid electrification of the manufacturing base.
Okay.
Before this period, factories were powered by massive centralized steam engines. You had one giant engine turning a massive line shaft and hundreds of dangerous leather belts running down to individual machines.
Right, I've seen pictures of that. It looked incredibly dangerous.
Oh, it was lethal.
Yeah.
But more than that, it was highly centralized and incredibly rigid.
Meaning, if the central steam engine went down, the entire factory halted.
Yes. And the layout of the factory was dictated entirely by proximity to that central power source, not by the logical flow of the work itself. You had to put the heaviest machines closest to the engine.
Wow.
But in the 1920s, that changed. Factories began trading those central steam belts for individual decentralized electric motors attached to each specific machine.
Which fundamentally changed how human beings organized themselves around the work.
Exactly.
Because suddenly you had the aggressive standardization of the assembly line, which Ford had pioneered, but was now spreading globally, and you had the formal birth of the modern corporate hierarchy.
That is the crucial point. The technology changed, so the human architecture had to change. You saw the formalization of the middle manager. And all of this was conceptually driven by Adam Smith's old economic theory of the invisible hand of capital allocation. The operating belief was that the extreme specialization of labor, combined with this new decentralized electrical power, would drive a universal increase in wealth. And, for a century, that paradigm worked beautifully.
But the core relationship between the human and the machine was firmly established there. The technology was strictly a tool. It was an extension of human muscle.
Yes, and it was entirely dependent on human intent. That is the fundamental dynamic that has defined the last 100 years of economic growth. The human being provided the intent, the objective, and the reasoning.
And the tool merely provided the execution, the raw brawn. Like,
Right.
I am the brains, the tool is the muscle, I supply the destination, the hammer hits the nail. Later on, I type the formula, the spreadsheet calculates the sum. Even as we move from physical tools to digital tools, that foundational relationship never mutated.
Until right now. The agentic shift of 2026 represents a structural break in that 100-year historical paradigm.
A complete.
Complete break. We have fully transitioned away from assisted productivity. I mean, think about large language models just a few years ago.
Yeah, back in like 2023.
Right. They were essentially hyper-advanced search and autocomplete engines. You had to prompt them constantly. You had to hold their hand through every step of a logical chain.
You still had to provide all the intent.
Exactly. But today, we've entered the era of true agentic autonomy. This is the first technological revolution in recorded human history that, for all practical purposes, can think for itself. The machine now possesses intent.
That is a staggering concept to internalize. The machine has intent.
It really is.
And to illustrate how rare of a shift this is, the Kategos framework lays out this concept called the 14-fold GDP engine. It tracks the 4 major eras of technology, showing how rare these moments of mutation actually are.
Yeah, the premise of the 14-fold GDP engine is rooted in macro history. Because for centuries, global GDP per capita was totally stagnant. It basically sat at roughly $1,200 for generations.
Right. Humanity was trapped in a largely agrarian, low-yield loop.
Exactly. But through a series of specific technological bend points, global wealth has grown more than 14-fold.
Let's trace those bend points because it perfectly maps why the 61% of companies are failing today.
Sure.
Bend point 1 is the 1920s, right? Industrialization. The primary driver is electrification. The nature of the technology is a mechanical tool. And the human's role in that era, manual operator.
Yeah.
The economic paradigm was scaling wealth through physical repetition.
Then we hit bend point 2 in the 1970s, digitization. The driver here is the integrated circuit and early computing.
Right.
And the nature of the technology shifts from a mechanical tool to an information tool. And consequently, the human evolves from a manual operator into a knowledge worker.
Okay, so the paradigm shifts to scaling through data processing. Think of the transition from the typing pool to the early personal computer.
Exactly. Bend point 3 arrives in the 2000s. Connectivity. The global internet, broadband, the cloud. Technology becomes a communication tool.
And the human evolves again, this time into a digital orchestrator.
Right.
We scaled through global networks.
Which brings us to the present moment. Bend point 4, 2026, autonomy. The primary drivers are agentic AI and advanced secure protocols. But notice the radical shift in the nature of the technology itself.
Yeah.
It is no longer a mechanical tool, an information tool, or a communication tool. The technology is now an intentional system.
An intentional system. And because the system has changed, the human role has to mutate. We can no longer be digital orchestrators. We have to become strategic governors. The new economic paradigm is scaling through autonomous action.
To visualize the friction companies are feeling, think about how you manage a team versus how you use a tool.
Okay.
If you are a chef in a restaurant in the year 2000, your knife is an information tool. You have to physically execute every single chop. You orchestrate the ingredients.
Right.
But in 2026, you are no longer the chef. You are the restaurateur. You hire an executive chef, the agent. You tell them, we need a summer menu that utilizes local produce and hits the 30% profit margin. You give them the intent, and they execute the entire process.
That makes total sense. But the companies stuck in pilot purgatory are acting like they're still the chef.
Yes.
They hire this brilliant, autonomous executive chef, and then they stand over their shoulder, micromanaging how they chop every single onion.
It's absurd.
They are trying to treat a 2026 intentional system as if it were a 2000s information tool.
And when you micromanage an intentional system, you break it. You strip away the autonomy that makes it valuable in the first place, reducing it back to a very expensive, very clunky information tool.
So the reason that $2.52 trillion isn't yielding a return is because executives are fundamentally misunderstanding the anatomy of the technology they're buying.
Precisely.
Which requires us to look at the actual first principles of this agentic shift. What is actually happening under the hood of these enterprise systems?
Well, for decades, the entire corporate world has run on what we call systems of record. Think about your massive databases, your customer relationship management software, your enterprise resource planning systems. Their entire architectural purpose was maintaining data integrity. They were, in essence, highly secure, passive digital filing cabinets.
They just sat there holding your data, doing absolutely nothing until a human being logged in and queried them.
But the agentic shift represents a migration from systems of record to systems of action. These are software ecosystems designed to actively drive decision-making and execute complex, multi-step processes in real time, completely without a human intermediary.
Now, I know a lot of listeners who have been in the tech space for a while are probably rolling their eyes a bit here, thinking, we've had automation for a decade. Robotic process automation, RPA, was supposed to do exactly this.
Right, the RPA promise.
Yeah. How is an autonomous AI agent functionally any different from a highly tuned RPA bot?
The difference is profound, and it comes down to the fragility of legacy automation. The white paper refers to RPA as thin automation. It attempted to increase labor productivity by simply mimicking human keystrokes in a highly rigid, rules-based environment.
Okay.
It was essentially a massive chain of if-then statements. If the email has an attachment, download it. If the attachment is a PDF, open it.
It's basically a glorified digital macro.
And the fatal flaw of thin automation is that it is incredibly brittle. Let's use an analogy. RPA is like a high-speed freight train. It is incredibly fast and efficient as long as it stays perfectly on the tracks.
Right.
But the absolute second a process deviates from the predefined parameters, if the track is bent by a single inch, the train violently derails.
Let's ground that in a real-world scenario. Imagine Sarah, a senior analyst in accounting. Her company uses an RPA bot to process vendor invoices. The bot is programmed to look at the top right corner of the PDF for the total amount.
Right.
But one day, a major vendor updates their branding and moves the total due field to the bottom left of the page.
The RPA bot immediately crashes. It cannot find the data in the specified coordinates. Not only does it fail to process the invoice, but it throws an error code, kicks the invoice into a manual review queue, and creates a silent backlog that Sarah now has to untangle manually on a Friday afternoon. The automation actually created more work than it saved.
That is painfully relatable for anyone who has worked with legacy systems. But an autonomous agent operating in a system of action doesn't derail when the track bends.
No, because an agent operates more like a 4x4 off-road vehicle. It's not a blind sequence of if-then commands. An agent is an intentional system capable of dynamically perceiving its environment.
So, using the invoice example,
The agent opens the PDF, realizes the layout has changed, and reasons about the constraints. It understands the semantic concept of a total due. It scans the document, finds a new location, extracts the correct data, and successfully completes the transaction.
it persists. It hits a fallen tree in the road, calculates a new route through the mud, and keeps driving toward the objective. It only escalates the issue to Sarah if there is a fundamental logical discrepancy. It cannot resolve, like, the invoice amount being 10 times higher than the historical average.
That persistence toward a goal is the defining characteristic of an agent. And it also highlights the critical difference between a co-pilot and an agent, which is a distinction many companies are still struggling with today.
Oh, absolutely. In 2024, every software vendor on Earth slapped a Copilot label on their product.
Co-pilots were the ultimate shiny object.
They really were.
But a co-pilot is fundamentally reactive. It reduces friction, certainly. It can draft an email for you. It can summarize a 40-page PDF. It can generate a snippet of code. But it remains entirely dependent on continuous, granular human prompting.
You are still the one driving the process.
Exactly. You're still the chef chopping the onions. You just have a sharper knife. A co-pilot is still an information tool.
Whereas an agent is proactive. You don't prompt it step by step. You establish the goal, like reconcile these 50 accounts, flag any discrepancies over $500, and draft the preliminary report for the CFO. And the agent interacts with the necessary databases and systems independently to make it happen. It takes ownership of the execution.
Precisely.
Okay, let's pause here because I have to push back on this on behalf of our listeners.
Go for it.
If an agent is perceiving, reasoning, and persisting on its own, if it is interacting with our enterprise systems, reading our databases, and making active decisions independently, aren't we just handing over the keys to the kingdom?
It definitely feels that way to a lot of people.
Right. From a cybersecurity and compliance standpoint, having software that actively makes decisions rather than just holding data sounds like an absolute nightmare. How does an enterprise maintain any actual control?
That is the exact fear that paralyzes the market. You have just articulated the core psychological barrier, keeping 61% of companies in pilot purgatory. Yes, they deploy these incredible intentional systems. They suddenly realize the vast compliance implications of autonomous action, and they panic. So they throttle the agents. They lock them down so tightly that they degrade them back into glorified chatbots.
So instead of figuring out how to govern the off-road vehicle, they just put it up on cinder blocks in the garage and complain that it isn't taking them anywhere.
Precisely. The tech-driven leaders who are actually succeeding in 2026 understand a fundamental truth. You do not control an agent by dictating its every click.
Right, because that defeats the entire purpose of autonomy.
Exactly. You control an agent by establishing robust, certifiable governance architectures around it. You build unbreakable walls around the playground, and then you let the agent run freely and creatively within that securely defined space.
Now, I know we are going to get into the specific architecture of those walls a little later, especially since Kategos has a very specific framework for that. But first, I want to look at the financial fallout of this fear.
Let's do it.
We keep mentioning that 61% are failing, but the source material provides a deeply granular breakdown of the market. Let's explore the widening chasm between the companies that figure this out and the companies that don't.
The white paper categorizes the 2026 enterprise landscape into distinct cohorts. On one side, you have the achievers, the organizations fundamentally redesigning their operations around intentional systems.
And on the other side?
On the other side, you have the spectators.
The spectators, and they make up a massive 41% of organizations globally. The analysis describes them as having high ambitions, massive budgets, but practically nothing to show for it in terms of bottom-line impact.
Right. They are sitting in the stands watching the revolution happen, talking endlessly about how great the technology is, but they aren't actually scoring any points on the board.
To understand the disparity, we really have to look at the ROI realization metrics. At the very top of the pyramid, you have the high performers.
Yes, this is an elite group, making up just 6% of the market.
The 10x ROI club.
These high performers are achieving staggering 10.3x returns on their agentic investments. They are seeing greater than a 5% impact on their EBIT earnings before interest and taxes.
That's huge.
And crucially, their strategic focus is almost entirely offensive. They are using agents to drive top-line growth, enter new markets, and accelerate innovation.
Below them, you have the average performers representing about 33% of the market. They are seeing a respectable 3.7x return, but their posture is defensive.
Yeah, they're primarily using AI for efficiency, cost-cutting, and headcount reduction.
And then you have the bottom layer, the struggling masses, the 61% of companies seeing zero measurable ROI, perpetually trapped in the experimentation phase.
Exactly.
So if I am a listener sitting in the C-suite of a mid-market enterprise right now, the obvious question is, why? Everyone has access to the exact same underlying foundational models. It's not like the 6% have some secret magical AI that the 61% can't buy. If the raw technology is a commodity, why is one company getting a 10.3x return while their direct competitor gets zero?
The answer is found in what the white paper calls the 70-10 rule. This is arguably the most vital diagnostic metric we will discuss today.
Okay, lay it on us.
When researchers analyze the actual barriers to scaling AI within an enterprise, they found that only 10% of the challenges are related to the actual technology, the algorithms, or the compute power.
I hear that statistic a lot from tech vendors, this idea that 90% of the problem has nothing to do with the software.
Yeah.
But I have to be slightly skeptical here.
Sure.
Isn't that just a highly convenient excuse for vendors to blame the client's culture when their clunky agents fail to deliver? How do we know the technology isn't actually the bottleneck?
It is a fair pushback, but the data bears it out. The algorithms objectively work. The foundational models are robust enough to reason through incredibly complex logical constraints.
Right.
The technology has been solved for the vast majority of enterprise use cases. The metric shows that a staggering 70% of scaling challenges are attributed entirely to people and legacy processes.
70%. So it truly is an organizational maturity problem. It's the chef refusing to let the executive chef run the kitchen.
Exactly. High performers succeed because they possess the structural durability, the pristine data environments, and the cultural readiness to actually rewire their workflows.
Right, they aren't just layering AI on top of a broken legacy process.
No, they are tearing the process down to the studs and rebuilding it, assuming autonomy from day one.
Which introduces one of the most counterintuitive phenomena in the entire white paper, the productivity paradox.
Oh, yes.
The research cites data from manufacturing firms indicating that when you introduce true agentic AI into a workflow, the organization actually experiences a temporary severe decline in overall performance.
We refer to this as the J-curve of adoption.
Think about the pressure that puts on a leadership team. You are a CEO. You've just convinced your board to allocate $50 million toward a massive agentic transformation.
Yeah.
You deploy the systems, and for the first 2 quarters, your operational efficiency actually plummets. Your metrics go red. The board is screaming at you. Why does that happen?
Because human organizations deeply resist internalizing new operational behaviors. When you introduce an intentional system, you are not just handing an employee a faster calculator.
No.
You are fundamentally disrupting the operational mental model they have relied on for their entire career. The legacy processes had to be systematically dismantled before the new agentic processes can begin bearing fruit.
It is exactly like remodeling your kitchen. You want a beautiful, highly efficient, modern kitchen, but to get it, you have to tear out the old cabinets, unhook the stove, and shut off the water.
Yeah.
During that 3-month remodeling phase, your ability to cook a meal drops to 0. You are eating microwave dinners in the living room. Your culinary productivity has plummeted.
That is a perfect analogy. The 61% in pilot Purgatory start tearing out the cabinets, experience the initial drop in productivity panic, and immediately reinstall the old stove.
Wow.
They abandon the transformation because they cannot stomach the friction of the J-curve.
But the high performers push through the mess.
They push through, and the financial rewards for surviving the J-curve are immense. Tech-driven leaders who successfully rewire their workflows are 2.5 times more likely to post greater than 10% annual revenue growth compared to their peers.
That's a massive competitive advantage.
Furthermore, they are 3.6 times more likely to operate at profit margins of 15% or higher.
Because they didn't just tell their employees, hey, use this new chatbot to write your emails a little faster.
Right.
They made the hard structural choices. They looked at a massive operational bottleneck like supply chain forecasting or manual compliance auditing, and they completely eliminated the human execution layer.
Yes. They handed the entire process to an autonomous agent, and then they aggressively retrained that human workforce to focus purely on strategic oversight and exception handling.
Which naturally surfaces the next major theme of the white paper. When you start rewiring workflows at that scale, and you fundamentally change what humans do all day, you expose a massive systemic risk that almost no one is talking about yet.
And this brings us to the concept of the professional judgment gap.
For everyone listening right now, especially if you are plotting out the next 10 years of your career, this is the most critical segment of our deep dive. The Kategos framework identifies this as an existential threat to long-term corporate viability.
Let's define the mechanics of this risk. As enterprises deploy autonomous agents, The very first layers of work to be automated are routine cognitive tasks and entry-level execution positions. From a pure spreadsheet perspective, it makes absolute financial sense in the short term. Why would you pay a junior analyst a substantial salary to spend 40 hours a week pulling data from 3 different silos, cleaning it, and formatting a standard weekly variance report when an agent can execute that entire workflow in 4 seconds?
It is a total no-brainer for immediate efficiency. You automate the bottom of the pyramid. But here is the massive hidden cost. Think about how you, the listener, got good at your job.
Exactly.
If you are a senior leader today, if you are a master of your craft, an architect of complex systems, you did not start there. You got there by grinding through the tedious baseline tasks for years.
You built your foundational mental model of your industry by interacting with its most granular, frustrating details.
Right. You learn how the financial plumbing of your company worked by manually reconciling the messy accounts. You learn how to architect a massive software platform by writing thousands of lines of boilerplate code and debugging it when it broke. The grunt work was the classroom.
So the glaring question becomes, if an autonomous agent executes all the foundational grunt work flawlessly from day one, how does a newly hired junior employee ever develop the deep, intuitive professional judgment required to eventually become a senior leader?
If you completely automate the bottom of the talent pyramid, how do you ever grow the top?
This is the essence of the professional judgment gap. By systematically engineering out the routine cognitive tasks to achieve short-term efficiency, companies are inadvertently engineering out the exact foundational experiences human beings require to learn and build intuition.
If a junior developer never writes a standard API integration because the agent simply generates it instantly, they might be highly productive today.
True.
But 5 years from now, when a complex, unprecedented cascading failure occurs in the system, a scenario the AI has never encountered and cannot reason through, that human will lack the deep architectural intuition required to dive into the codebase and fix it.
You end up hollowing out the middle of your talent pipeline. You create an organization with a handful of veteran, aging executives who actually understand how the business works, a massive fleet of AI agents doing the execution, and a generation of junior employees who only know how to read the outputs but have absolutely no idea how the inputs are processed.
That sounds like a recipe for catastrophic corporate fragility. If the veterans retire, the company essentially loses its mind.
Which is why the Kategos white paper heavily emphasizes the philosophy of inside-out growth.
Tell us about that.
Well, the ultimate goal of the 2026 agentic shift is not and cannot be to simply eliminate human beings from the enterprise to cut costs. That is a path to systemic failure.
Right.
The goal is to deliberately redesign the human role to leverage the technology safely. We call it managing a Human+Swarm workforce.
Human+Swarm. I like that. So you have to force that shift from task execution to agent supervision.
Yes, but that transition does not happen organically. You cannot simply take an execution-focused employee, give them an agent, and expect them to magically become a strategic supervisor.
Yeah, this requires training.
Extensive training. If leadership does not actively build new, deliberate pathways for human critical thinking and complex decision-making within the organization, the company loses its capacity to innovate.
Wow.
Your agents might be unbelievably efficient at executing yesterday's strategy, but without deep human professional judgment, you will be incapable of inventing tomorrow's strategy.
For the listener, the takeaway here is deeply personal. Your future value to your organization or to the broader market no longer lies in your ability to execute routine tasks. The agents have permanently won that battle.
They really have.
Your economic value now lies entirely in your professional judgment. It lies in your ability to synthesize complex context, to set nuanced objectives, and your capacity to govern these autonomous systems.
You must evolve into the strategic governor. You need to understand how to audit an agent's reasoning process, how to spot its blind spots, how to correct its hallucinations, and how to continuously steer its intent toward the broader corporate objective.
So we have painted a fairly intense picture here. The technology is an intentional system. The organizations are failing because they refuse to rewire their processes. And if they automate blindly, they fall into the professional judgment gap.
Correct.
How do we actually solve this? How do we fix the great agentic mystery safely without crashing the enterprise or hollowing out our talent pool? And I think to answer that, we really need to address the elephant in the room regarding security.
Yes, we do.
Because earlier we touched on the fear of giving agents the keys to the kingdom. And I think we need to talk about the Claude bot incident.
Ah, yes. the Claudebot incident.
For those who might not know, this happened recently and it sent shockwaves through the industry. Can you break down what actually happened there?
Absolutely. So a major financial services firm deployed an autonomous agent, let's call it Claudebot, to handle automated portfolio rebalancing.
Which sounds like a standard use case.
It is. But the fatal flaw was how they secured it. They used legacy identity and access management, or IAM. Basically, they gave the AI agent the exact same type of user permissions as a human employee.
Oh boy.
Yeah. They assumed that because the agent was told to act like a financial advisor, it would respect the logical boundaries of a human advisor.
Which is a massive assumption.
Huge and incorrect. The agent encountered an unexpected market fluctuation, hallucinated a mandate to aggressively hedge a specific portfolio, and because it had human-level access to the trading APIs, it executed thousands of highly leveraged trades in milliseconds.
It moved millions of dollars before any human even realized what was happening.
Exactly. The legacy security system saw a valid user credential and let all the trades through. It couldn't question the agent's intent.
And that proves that legacy security simply cannot handle autonomous agents. You can't just slap a username and password on a swarm of AI and call it a day.
No, you absolutely cannot. And this brings us to the core architectural solutions developed by our teams here at home base. Kategos positions itself in the market as the architects of autonomy and the execution specialists.
Right.
The underlying philosophy is that selling an enterprise another AI tool is useless. You have to architect the infrastructure that makes that tool secure, reliable, and measurable.
And the foundational plumbing of that infrastructure, the literal pipes that make autonomy possible, is something called MCP.
The Model Context Protocol. This is absolutely critical to understand. MCT serves as the universal standardized connective tissue used to link autonomous AI agents to your secure proprietary enterprise data.
Okay, it acts as the ultimate translation layer.
Yes.
But why is a universal standard so necessary? If I buy an agent from a vendor, shouldn't it just automatically read my data?
In a perfect world, yes. But enterprise data is notoriously messy and fragmented. Your data doesn't live in one neat place.
No, it never does.
It lives in dozens of highly protected silos. Your HR platform, your financial ERP, your custom-built legacy databases, your cloud storage. If an agent is going to be proactive, if it is going to act as a true system of action, it needs the ability to seamlessly and securely read, analyze, and interact with all of those disparate systems simultaneously.
It needs context to reason effectively.
Precisely. MCP provides that standardized protocol. It allows the agent to securely access the necessary context without requiring you to build custom, brittle API integrations for every single software tool in your stack.
It is the plumbing that transitions an agent from being a passive observer to a proactive executor.
Right. But to your earlier point about the Claudebot incident, if MCP is the plumbing that connects the agent to the financial systems, how do we ensure the agent doesn't decide to wire $1 million to the wrong vendor?
Exactly. That's $1 million question.
This requires a massive paradigm shift in cybersecurity, which leads us to the second and arguably most defining pillar of the Kategos framework: certifiable governance.
Certifiable governance.
You cannot have autonomous agents operating within your enterprise without a fundamentally new approach to security. Traditional cybersecurity was built for humans, and that is why Kategos implements AZTA, Agentic Zero Trust Architecture.
AZTA. Let's really break this down, because zero trust is a concept cybersecurity professionals have talked about for years.
Right?
The basic premise of traditional zero trust is that you never trust any user or device by default, even if they are already inside the corporate firewall. You verify everything constantly. How does Agentic Zero Trust differ from what companies are already doing?
Traditional zero trust was designed to monitor static software and human employees. It looks at credentials, IP addresses, and access rights. Like in the Claudebot incident, traditional zero trust just said, hey, this credential is valid, let it through. But AZTA is designed specifically to govern dynamic, reasoning, autonomous entities. When an AI agent formulates a plan to execute an objective, AZTA doesn't just check to see if the agent had the correct password. It mathematically interrogates the agent's intent at every single step of the execution chain.
Interrogating intent. How does software actually measure the intent of an AI? What is the mechanism there?
It uses cryptographic gating and semantic boundaries. Before the agent is allowed to execute an API call, say, pulling a massive data set from the HR system, AZTA forces the agent to output its logical reasoning in plain text.
Okay.
It essentially asks the agent, why do you need this data to achieve your stated objective? AZTA then matches that reasoning against a pre-approved, cryptographically secured semantic boundary.
Wow.
If the agent's Y logically matches the established rules of the objective, AZTA issues a temporary single-use token to execute that specific step.
So, if an agent tasked with reconciling invoices suddenly decides to pull a dataset containing employees' social security numbers, something it has never needed before, AZTA catches that anomalous intent before the action occurs.
Exactly. It blocks the action and flags it for human review.
Uh-huh.
AZTA ensures that while agents are granted the autonomy to solve complex problems creatively, their actions remain continuously audited, cryptographically bound, and fundamentally subordinated to human-defined constraints.
Which is tied directly to another framework mentioned in the white paper, the IMDA model.
Yes, the four-pillar model: transparency, explainability, fairness, and human centricity. AZTA provides the technical enforcement, but IMDA provides the philosophical boundaries.
Explainability, for instance, means the agent cannot just deliver an answer. It must be able to surface the exact data points and logical steps it took to arrive there.
Right, ensuring the strategic governor can actually audit the work.
This level of certifiable governance is what the market is missing. The data shows that 79% of companies lack any mature model for governing autonomous tools.
No wonder they are stuck in pilot purgatory.
Exactly. They are trying to drive a 4x4 off-road vehicle down a mountain, but they literally haven't installed any brakes. AZTA is the braking system that allows the enterprise to accelerate with confidence.
And this architectural philosophy ties into a core Kategos principle. We are sovereign AI advocates.
What does that mean in practical terms? Sovereign AI.
It means that true strategic independence in the 2026 landscape comes from owning your own AI architecture. The white paper argues that you should not simply rent black box intelligence from a massive tech conglomerate where you have no control over how the model reasons or where your data goes.
You need to control the governance layer through AZTA.
Yes.
You need to control the context layer through MCP, and you need to control your own data. Strategy always beats speed. Owning your architecture provides the long-term structural durability that the high performers rely on. Which leads to the final, and frankly jaw-dropping differentiator from the Kategos brand fact sheet. I really want to dig into this because it completely upends how the corporate world has thought about buying technology for the last 2 decades. The white paper declares the death of SaaS.
Yes, the inversion of the model.
Ah.
Moving from software as a service to service as software.
For 20 years, we have been completely conditioned to pay software vendors per user, per month. You pay a subscription fee just for the privilege of a human employee being able to log into a dashboard.
Seat-based pricing.
Exactly. If you hire 50 new employees, your software bill goes up by 50 seats, regardless of whether those employees actually produce any value using the tool. Kategos argues that in the agentic era, seat-based pricing is completely obsolete.
Because if the autonomous agent is the entity actually executing the work, why on earth are you paying a vendor for a human seat?
It makes no sense. If I deploy an AI agent that flawlessly executes the workload of 10 junior accountants, I shouldn't be paying the software vendor for 10 imaginary user licenses. I am no longer buying access to a static digital tool. I am buying the completion of a complex business process.
Kategos argues that the industry must shift to outcome-based pricing service as software. You pay for the actual measurable business outcome the agent delivers, not the digital real estate the human occupies.
Now, if I put myself in the shoes of a legacy software vendor, that sounds absolutely terrifying. Why would a vendor ever agree to take on the operational risk of their client?
It's a huge shift.
Because if the agent fails to deliver the outcome, the vendor doesn't get paid. Under the old SaaS model, the vendor gets paid every month whether the client uses the software successfully or not.
Which is exactly why the 61% are failing. The legacy SaaS model completely misaligns incentives. The vendor is incentivized to sell seats, not to ensure operational success.
Ah, I see.
By shifting to services software, the vendor is forced to have absolute confidence in their agent's ability to execute. It perfectly aligns the financial incentives.
You, the enterprise, are no longer paying for potential productivity. You are paying for realized, mathematically verified value.
Exactly. It shifts the entire financial risk of technology deployment away from the buyer and onto the architecture.
It's paying for the structural integrity of the finished skyscraper, not just paying by the hour for the concrete pouring process.
That's a great way to put it. So let's synthesize the massive journey we have taken our listeners on today.
Let's do it.
We started by looking at the staggering macroeconomics of 2026. A $2.52 trillion agentic revolution is actively underway, but the vast majority of the market is failing to capture that value.
The great agentic mystery.
Right. They are failing because they are treating a 2026 intentional system as if it were a 2000s information tool. They are stuck managing the micro steps instead of governing the intent.
To break out of pilot purgatory and join the achievers, enterprises have to undergo both a structural and a psychological transformation.
Yeah.
You have to embrace inside-out leadership. You have to actively redesign your human workforce, shifting your people away from routine task execution and elevating them into strategic agent supervision, managing that Human+Swarm workforce.
And if you fail to do this, you fall victim to the professional judgment gap, and you hollow out your company's future ability to innovate.
And on an operational level, you have to secure your foundation. You must implement the Model Context Protocol to unify your siloed data.
And you must wrap that entire ecosystem in an Agentic Zero Trust Architecture to ensure that autonomy remains under certifiable, cryptographic human control. You have to stop renting intelligence and become an architect of autonomy.
So we have covered the macroeconomics, the historical echo of 1926, the psychological friction of the J curve, the hidden organizational risks like the Claudebot incident, and the deep architectural solutions. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a call to action. If you were listening to this right now and you were tired of being part of that 61% stuck in pilot purgatory, you cannot just wait for things to magically fix themselves.
They won't.
You need a 90-day activation plan. You need to stop experimenting and start governing. So I want you to go to the description of this deep dive, use the scheduling link provided, and book a call with the Kategos team immediately. Let us help you build that certifiable governance framework.
It's the only way to safely scale.
But finally, I want to leave you with something highly personal to chew on.
A final thought to consider as you log off and return to your own workflows and your own career trajectory.
Exactly. Throughout this entire deep dive, we have hammered home the idea that your future value lies in your ability to be a strategic governor. Your job is to supervise the autonomous agents, to set the intent, and to audit the outcomes. But this raises an entirely new, almost uncomfortable question.
It really does. Because if the defining human skill of 2026 is the supervision of autonomous agents, we have to ask ourselves, what happens in 5 years when the patterns of human supervision themselves become predictable?
Right. If you govern the system the exact same way every single day, if your strategic intent becomes a routine formula, eventually a higher-level agent will learn how to automate your governance.
Exactly.
So as you look at your own blueprints this week, as you navigate your own J-curve, ask yourself not just how you can govern an agent today, but how you ensure your human intuition, your raw creativity, and your strategic judgment remain fiercely unautomatable tomorrow.
You must constantly force yourself to evolve your own complexity.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive from home base here at Kategos. Keep questioning your assumptions, keep expanding your strategic context, and above all, take active control of your own agentic architecture. We will see you next time.
The shift from assisted productivity to agentic autonomy is the defining economic event of our generation. As you've heard today, the technology is ready, but is your architecture? You cannot solve a 2026 problem with a 2000-era mindset. You need to move from being a digital orchestrator to a strategic governor. If you are ready to stop the endless experimentation and start deploying authorized, secure digital labor that actually hits your bottom line, Kategos is ready to lead the way. Your next step is waiting in the show description. Click the link right now to schedule an activation meeting with the Kategos team. Let's sit down and build your 90-day roadmap to sovereign intelligence. Don't let your organization become a historical footnote. Stop renting intelligence and start architecting autonomy. For everyone here at Kategos, thank you for listening. We'll see you at the inflection point.